Hello everyone, so in this video we're going to talk a little bit about Bring Her Back. So just to introduce this movie, it is the second horror film by Australian filmmakers Danny and Michael Philippou, who are twin brothers and they got their start on YouTube. So, good for them. And this also is, like I said, their second movie. And their first one was Talk to Me. I don't know if anyone has ever seen that, but it is also a movie that is about grief because it involves these young people contacting ghosts through this severed hand. And it also is about the occult, obviously, like Bring Her Back is. So, Bring Her Back, just to give some backstory to it, it was inspired by the director's friend's blind little sister whose parents didn't want her waiting for the bus on her own, but she wanted some independence. And of course, the whole point of the paper is examining the disability representation in the movie. And Piper is our most prominent disabled character. She is blind, or more specifically, partially sighted, so we're going to be talking about her a lot, as well as some other people. But before we do that, I wanted to give some more context. So, this is a horror movie, obviously, and horror and disability have had a long history with each other. With this assignment, I usually have a horror movie and a Disney movie because both genres are heavily involved with disabled representation. And with horror movies, it's complicated because you have such characters as Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, etc., who have physical disabilities in their faces, and the whole point seems to be that they have those disabilities because they're meant to look like monsters to scare you, right? And this goes back to the beginning. I mean, there are movies like Phantom of the Opera that falls into that mold. There's a movie called Freaks from the 1930s, which seems to depict these circus performers who have physical differences in a positive light, but it also falls into portraying them as monstrous as well. So that can be problematic. It's not a great look, and it could potentially be harmful for real people. And there are other depictions in horror movies that could be seen as problematic of mental illness specifically, like in Psycho, for example. I mean, even that word nowadays could be considered offensive by some, or ableist, if you will. It follows Norman Bates, who is a stereotypical, quote-unquote, crazy horror antagonist, and oftentimes people with mental illnesses are portrayed as the villains. Their mental illness is meant to be scary, and that's what we call narrative prosthesis, to drop one of our disability theory terms, using someone's disability to represent their evilness. And then we have people who are victims in horror movies because of their disabilities, which is a third category of potentially problematic representation. I actually I've never heard of this movie before, but it's apparently an Audrey Hepburn movie, and it is called Wait Until Dark, and it has this woman, Susie, in danger, played by a sighted person, by the way, in danger because she's blind, and yeah, in short, horror movies have had a complicated history with depicting disability. So let's see how how Bring Her Back does on that front. So I'm not going to talk about this in depth because I want us to do that in class, but it has various symbols that I think are significant to how it portrays disability, such as circles. There's lots of circles in this. Airplanes, knives, Pom Pom the stuffed dog, creatine, and the car side view mirror, which keeps falling off. So, yeah. I wanted to talk about these in class, so I won't talk about them too much here, but I will say, that the circles seem to represent, of course, the occult ritual to bring Kathy back, but also some sort of negative cycle, I would say, as opposed to the freedom represented by the airplanes, and there's more to that, which I'll let y'all think about. The creatine is a way for, Andy to cope with his PTSD because he works out. And of course, I think Pom Pom foreshadows the plan to bring Kathy back because she is a stuffed dog that that Laura just can't seem to let go of. The knives, I think, are significant to the trauma involved with the dad's death and how that cycle continues later on in the movie. And then, of course, I have no idea really what the car side view mirror is, but it keeps falling off, right? Sort of, and it's on Andy's car, so it might represent the fragility of his relationship with, Piper, which is so important, right? So, we'll talk more about these in class, but let's move on and talk about Piper for a minute. So, the general consensus among critics is that she is a stellar representation of a blind person on film because she goes through a lot of things that your average everyday blind person goes through in real life. She doesn't want to be babied for being blind. That's why she doesn't like to use her cane, but we see that she doesn't really need the cane all that much because she gets around just fine. She also pokes fun at herself. She's not like, woe is me, I'm blind, or you need to treat me in a special way because I'm blind. When Andy, accidentally runs over something at the beginning of the film, she, says, I thought I was the blind one. So, you know, she has a good sense of humor, about her situation. She also is manipulated and lied to by sighted people in her life, like Laura, and even Andy, who can't bring himself to say what Dad looks like at the funeral to her, or he says he looks good, but he never looked at him because he's dealing with his trauma. So, yeah, blind people in real life have to put up with being gaslit, being lied to, even if it's a white lie, to make them feel better or make the person who's telling the lie feel better, etc. That is a very common experience for blind people. I even looked up a YouTube video where a blind person said that this was very relatable. And also, she's just normal, isn't she, Piper? We see her texting, and we learn how blind people text with voiceover technology, which is a nice little bit of real life, of representation that is true to real life, and just the typical lived blind experience that not many people may be aware of. But yeah, Piper is not helpless. She saves herself at the end, even with Andy gone. And that said, she isn't meant to be, this inspiration, per se. She's just meant to be this normal teen who, does the normal teen stuff and is capable and has agency and can fend for herself in times of danger. And she's also a badass, isn't she? She plays goalball, which I've never heard of, but she seems to be very good at it, so that just shows that her blindness doesn't really limit her all that much, if at all. And yeah, like I said before, she saves herself without Andy's help, so she is quite capable. But let's talk about Andy really quick. So Andy has a disability too, I would say, but it isn't so visible as Piper's is. So Andy has PTSD, but his PTSD is quite nuanced and layered and not simple. So that is appreciated because it gives a full picture of the condition. And it's quite true to how people in real life deal with PTSD. So his PTSD is not simply because he saw his father die in the shower. It is because it is also the result of him having gone through abuse from his father, physical abuse, and also the fact that he was hiding it from Piper. That also is something that contributes to his PTSD because he has some unresolved guilt there by never telling her the truth. He does use exercise, the weightlifting. My interpretation was that he uses that to cope with his PTSD. And that is a good thing, I think the film presents, because remember, he lifts, what was that big, heavy, I think it was a bird bath or something like that, and he breaks into that creepy shed where Kathy is frozen, and his the strength he built up, I think, is what enabled him to be able to do that. But yeah, exercise, the film said, is a good way to cope. It strengthens you physically and mentally. But of course, Laura, because she is evil, goes and turns it into something bad, saying he's all jacked up on testosterone or hormones or steroids or whatever, and is trying to hurt Piper and is violent, which is totally not true. And yeah, he resolves his guilt by confessing to Piper that he hit her, and he says he regrets this more than anything, so he does have some closure on that even before his death, although it is quite tragic that Piper never hears it because Laura has intercepted her phone. And Laura, she sucks, you know? Let's talk about this crazy bitch. She exacerbates Andy's PTSD, right? She forces him to kiss his dead father, which he totally doesn't want to do. And I think that is all by design. I think it's all part of her plan to make Andy seem unfit to be a guardian. Because Laura is quite selfish. She doesn't care about these kids. I don't think she even cares about Piper at the end of the day. I think all she cares about is Kathy. Because the whole idea is she wants to use Piper as a vessel to resurrect Kathy. And that just goes to show that she has gone insane because of her grief. She is doing evil things because grief has led her here. She even openly says to Andy, "I never coped with losing Kathy," which the film says is not a good thing. That said, she's also a counselor, which is quite ironic because it seems like she herself needs a good bit of counseling. So we might ask, is she acting like things are fine at home, even though she totally has some horrible grief to deal with, because she feels pressure to have things together as a counselor? perhaps that is a case of compulsory able-bodiedness, in that she feels pressure, as a counselor to be someone who has it all together. But, that said, she of course does not. She never coped with the loss of Kathy. And instead of finding healthy ways to cope, which is what you should do, the film seems to say, she turns to this weird resurrection ritual, which just puts other people in danger, harms other people, kills other people. So, all of that said, there are a few ways you could take Laura. She seems, in many ways, to be your stereotypical crazy horror villain, like Norman Bates, like Jack Torrance in The Shining, or somebody like that. But, who, manipulates and hurts others for their own selfish ends, or what have you. But, I think there might be a little nuance to her, because she is maybe sympathetic. I mean, I know she comes across as, on the whole, pretty unsympathetic, like, it's hard to feel sorry for her. But in that final image where she is in the pool cradling Kathy's body, I sort of did feel a little bit sorry for her, maybe. I know her grief does not justify her actions, but, yeah, she could just be an example of what happens to somebody when they do not deal with their grief in a healthy way. So she could serve as a warning. You might see her as just a crazy horror villain. But, yeah, that is Laura. And then we have Ollie. So, Ollie is a unique case when it comes to representation of disabilities in this movie. So I had to rely on Wikipedia. I'm just going to go ahead and confess, because it was hard to follow in the movie itself. A little bit hard at least, to follow what was going on with him, but apparently he is demon possessed when he is mute. And the birthmark, quote unquote, I'm not sure what that is. I think it's a mark of him being possessed, probably. Because I think Connor Bird, who Ollie really is, he doesn't have a birthmark at all. And yeah, so with Ollie, it is a bit potentially problematic in terms of representation of disability. Because we have this child who seems to be, selectively mute, who seems to have a birthmark. But he's really a demon, or him existing in that state is him being possessed, which might not be the best. It might not have been the best choice to present him as this seemingly disabled child when it turns out he's actually demon possessed, if you see what I'm saying. The birthmark could very well be a case of narrative prosthesis. It represents that he is evil, or at least that he's overtaken by evil. So yeah, Ollie, he kind of, in my opinion, he kind of is like one of those scary, disabled characters in horror movies, who look a certain way and act a certain way, and they're meant to be creepy for being different. But make of him what you will. Decide for yourself whether you think the way he's depicted is problematic at all. But I think he also represents how Laura never dealt with her grief. I'm not sure if the film ever outright says it, but I think Laura lost her nephew, the real Ollie, in addition to Kathy, and so he also is sort of a replacement for, quote unquote, for someone she lost, and he ends up getting, dehumanized and harmed in the process, which is not good. Deal with your grief in healthy ways, the movie says. Speaking of grief, let's throw it back to Dad for a bit. So Dad was not the best person on Earth, to put it lightly. He died from a drug overdose, so he had problems in that area. He also was physically abusive towards Andy, and from what Andy says, it was pretty horrible because he apparently hit Andy so hard he would pass out and wake up not knowing where he was. So it was pretty horrible. It is interesting that he's not Piper's biological father. And I feel like in these sorts of narratives with step families, it's usually the other way around, where the birth child is the preferred one. But in this case, the step child is the preferred one. It's Piper who Dad likes because she's, I guess, the child he always wanted. But that isn't to say that he is totally bad. I mean, he's pretty bad, but he also is the one who warns Andy that Piper will die in the rain. I don't know if that's just because he cares a lot about Piper that he's warning him, or what, or if he genuinely is maybe trying to reconcile with his son from beyond the grave. But that's there, and it's unclear if this was really Dad speaking or if this was a hallucination, or at least it's fairly unclear. I lean toward it actually being Dad, because if you notice, Dad's face switches to Ollie's face really quick at the end of the apparition, which implies, I believe, that ghosts, I guess, are using Ollie as a way to communicate. So there's that. And it is interesting that Dad comes back in a way, but only to help save Piper. It's not that he's coming back to try to fill some sort of void like Laura tries to do in her plot to bring back Kathy. Because I think Andy is sort of at peace with Dad being gone, or at least he tries to be, until Laura attempts to ruin it. Why a Russian VHS of all things? I thought about this for a while. Why on earth is the resurrection ritual contained on a Russian VHS tape? The only thing I could really think of is, regarding the Russia thing, is Russia, is this distant land, especially from Australia. And it has that mystique to it as this exotic location, where occult things could go on, a place where occult things could happen because it's far off and mysterious or what have you. But it also isn't out of pocket, I would say, because there's Rasputin, right, who was someone who held influence over the Russian royal family right before the fall of the Russian Empire. And he was a mystic. He dabbled in faith healing. And the Empress wanted him to heal her son, who was a hemophiliac. And of course, that didn't really do anything. The son ended up dying. Which might indicate that this ritual is not all it is cracked up to be. I mean, for one thing, it hurts several people, kills people, and it is not how you should approach your grief, obviously. It just creates more and more destruction. VHS. Why a VHS tape? I think the reason why is pretty clear. I think it's because a VHS to me represents the not so distant past. You know, I watched VHS tapes as a kid, which was a long time ago, but not terribly long ago. It's sort of like how Kathy, she was alive seemingly a long time ago, but also alive not so long ago at all, and we can see Laura reaching, you know, for that not so distant past. And of course she has home videos of Kathy, which I believe are on VHS. I could be mistaken about that. But the videos are taken at Halloween, it looks like, which I found to be a little bit weird, but I think that sort of connects the home videos to the VHS tape. And because, you know, it gives a creepy vibe to the home videos, and of course the VHS is very terrifying with the resurrection ritual. So the film might be saying, it's fine to have your memories in the case of the home videos, but it's not fine to try to use this resurrection ritual to bring your daughter back. You should just move on and accept that she is gone. That leads me to my final thoughts. This film slaps. It slaps indeed. That is what I say. I do think that it portrays disability in a positive way overall, and in ways that are nuanced and true to life, especially with Piper and her blindness and Andy with his PTSD. But as far as Laura goes, I'm a bit torn. She is not totally unsympathetic, but on the other hand, she is quite evil. I mean, she straight up kidnaps a kid and causes him to become demon-possessed, and all because she couldn't get over her child dying. And she also tries to use this girl as a vessel to bring her daughter back while tearing her away from her brother, which is pretty horrible. So now that I think about it, she does come across as your typical crazy horror villain in lots of ways, which, you know, could be the film falling back on typical horror tropes where insanity equals evil, mental illness is simplified, sensationalized, etc., which may not be the best representation of mental illness, but there it is in the movie as well, alongside the positive and nuanced representations we see in people like Piper and Andy. Alright, but yes, that is what I had to say about disability as it is depicted in Bring Her Back. I hope this gave you some good ideas for the paper, and when I see y'all next time, we will talk about the movie more in depth, especially the symbols within it. If you are watching this because you're in the class that picked Elio, I hope this movie gave you some ideas if you are trying to write about Bring Her Back instead. Alright, thank you guys so much. I'll see y'all next time.
Please comment the answers to or email me the answers to the following questions. 1. In the video, Ollie's birthmark is identified as a potential example of what? 2. What is one example of Piper's experiencing reflecting the real-life experience of blind people? 3. Laura, a counselor, puts on the appearance of everything being fine even though she is crushed by grief. This is an example of what?